Law, which forbids providing weapons to militaries and countries that grossly violate human rights. The weapons industry in Massachusetts needs to be forced to halt its shipments to Israel. I'll just say I first went to Gaza in 1979, and probably the worst night of my life some years later was when a young Palestinian named Yusuf, who was violating the curfew, was shot twice between the eyes for the crime of simply saying no, standing up for Palestinian rights. And that night there was a struggle between the IDF and his family and friends over who got his body. As a Jew, I can only remember what happened in Europe years earlier. Mr. Levy, in your roles as a Jew and as a Democratic U.S. official, I appeal to you to obey not only the prescriptions of the Leahy Law, but also to honor the most essential lessons from the European Judaicide. Never again to anyone, never turn your head away from witnessing and responding to injustice. Right. Yes, the massacre that Hamas inflicted on the Israelis on October 7th was a deplorable crime, which must be condemned and never repeated. But the people of Gaza were not and are not the enemy. At least 25,000 Gazans, the vast majority of them children and women, have been killed and wounded. 25,000 is 1 in 100 Gazans, and just over 20 times the number of Israelis killed in October. If we translate that proportionately into U.S. numbers, it's the equivalent of more than 3 million U.S. people. 3% of all Gazans have either been killed or wounded, with no end in sight. Nowhere is safe from the Israeli bombs and shelling. 70% of all homes in Gaza have been destroyed. The United Nations humanitarian chief describes Gaza as uninhabitable, with water, food, and fuel still in short supply. The U.S. Relief and Works Agency in Gaza reports that 570,000 people face quote-unquote catastrophic hunger. Hundreds of thousands, it reports, face death from famine, thirst, disease, and lack of food. Netanyahu and his government's attacks have been targeted against the people of Gaza more than Hamas. The goal goes far beyond destroying Hamas. As we witness Gazans being driven to the border with Egypt and read Israeli cabinet members' appeals to quote-unquote thin the Palestinian population of Gaza, the ultimate goal is a second and greater Nakba, the expulsion of massive numbers of Palestinians. But unlike 1948, Egypt is not cooperating as Jordan did 75 years ago. Under pressure from the Biden administration and world public opinion, Netanyahu is pledged to pursue Hamas with more surgical strikes. But the devastating and indiscriminate bombings go on, and the death toll mounts. By law and in respect for the most basic traditions and mores of human decency, we must stop the genocide and work for peace. Let me add that the roots of today's crimes trace to centuries of European anti-Semitism and to the Balfour Doctrine, which was designed to reinforce British and since 1948-56 U.S. hegemony in the oil-rich Arab world. Herzl's Zionism sought a land without people for a people without a land. But like other colonial settler initiatives, think the United States, South Africa, Australia, there were people on the land. The Muslim Nusayr family traces its presence in Jerusalem to the 4th century and has long held keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is a terrible irony of history that Israel has been caught and is paying the price for holding the European colonial bag. Indeed, as Yasser Arafat said back in 1981, when I interviewed him in Beirut, he said it's cowboys and Indians all over again. And what we're witnessing in real time is how the West was won in this country. But the 21st century is not the 18th or 19th centuries. Genocides are now witnessed in real time and rightly generate global outrage. Let's skip over here for time here. Extending the war means extending Netanyahu's time in office and delaying his hoped-for ouster and imprisonment for corruption. We should appreciate that they launched a poorly conceived war of revenge and conquest. And the Israeli Prime Minister has placed himself and Israel in an impossible situation. Even General Gadi Mishakot of the War Cabinet concedes that the IDF cannot achieve its announced goal of totally destroying Hamas, a war being fought in the racist context of Gazans being human animals. But the goal is not going to be met. Netanyahu thus finds himself in an impossible situation, fighting a war that cannot be won and which politically he cannot afford to lose. One possible Netanyahu escape hatch is to widen the war to bring the U.S. more deeply into it on Israel's behalf. This helps us to understand the recent drone assassination of Iran's Revolutionary Guard intelligence chief in Damascus and the ultimatum you know about here in the United States that Israel has delivered
Were you all demonstrating when the Hamas murdered all those senators?
In response to a resistance act, Israel has now done at least 20. Put it otherwise, Biden appears to be falling into Netanyahu's trap as our president widens the conflict with an unwinnable war against the Houthis in Yemen. There is a way out. Biden could and should declare enough. Enough! Cease providing diplomatic cover in the United Nations and elsewhere of the IDF's genocide and move to enforce the Leahy Law. These and the firm resolve that constructive U.S.-Israeli relations depend on an Israeli commitment to engage in credible for either a two-state solution or another political framework that guarantees Palestinians national self-determination and the full exercise of their human rights. Noam Chomsky once remarked that there are rational solutions to the existential threats that face humanity. The question, he concluded, is whether or not we have the will to implement. Joshua Levy, I appeal to you. No